Thanks, everyone, for sticking around for our panel. And welcome to the future of AI in healthcare. We certainly have a tall order for this conversation, and we promise we will deliver. My name is Morgan Cheatham, and I'm a partner and head of healthcare and life sciences at Breyer Capital. And related to this conversation, I'm also on the editorial team for the New England Journal of Medicine AI and board of directors for the Coalition for Health AI. It's particularly meaningful for our firm to be here in conversation with each of you today. We've had a long-standing collaboration with the UT system, and my partner, Jim Breyer, serves actively on the President's Commercialization Advisory Board of UT Austin. And so I just want to thank everyone for having us. And we couldn't be more excited about all of the activity and enthusiasm of what's coming out of UT here today. Before I introduce our wonderful panelists to my left, I do want to take a moment to ground ourselves in a shared language of where we are in this transformation. Of course, in this room, we have leaders from health systems, payers, providers, technology companies, startups, clinicians, and researchers. But we find ourselves in a unique moment when the conversation around AI in healthcare has transitioned from potential to kinetic energy. And the signals are abundantly clear, as we've heard over the last few days. Over 85% of health systems are leveraging AI in some form or fashion. 2/3 of clinicians cite that they are actively using this technology at the point of care. And interestingly, from the venture perspective, of the newly minted unicorns in AI this year thus far, more than half are in healthcare. And despite all of this, when we look at the data between pilot conversion to production, only 1 in 3 projects have become enduring. So we're living in this unique paradox that we'll unpack in our conversation today, which I would describe as a proliferation of prototypes, but perhaps a poverty of permanence. And I would argue that the gap between what we can do today, scientifically, clinically, and technologically, and what we will pay for, adopt, and sustain economically in healthcare has never been wider. And so the question that our panelists will help us answer today is not whether this technology can work, because ChatGPT and other large model companies have shown this to us over the last 2.5 years, but rather, will it be used, will it be trusted, and will it deliver value? And that's exactly the tension that we're here to explore. I'm joined by leaders to my left who I will now introduce, who are building and deploying real systems, navigating this friction, unlocking trust, and pushing the field that we in this room all love dearly forward. So please welcome, to my left, Alex Harb, CEO of Lena Health, Henry O'Connell, CEO of Canary Speech, Justin Norden, CEO of Qualified Health, Robert Budman, CMIO of Nuance, and lastly, Tomi Putanen, CEO of Signal One AI. Thank you. All right, so I promise we're going to keep this interesting. I'd like to start actually on the far end with you, Tomi, all the way down there. Tell us your vision. What are you building in healthcare, and what role does AI play?
I'm going to flip the question around, and I'm going to ask, what is UT Health build? And we are looking to enable that. This has been quite an incredible symposium, just seeing the future being built in front of our eyes. And it's such a new time for healthcare, where the healthcare system is building the future. And this is so different from the prior transformations that have happened. You know, an EMR adoption, there wasn't a lot of choice. It was epic, and there was a playbook. Your migration to the cloud, your SI took you to Azure or AWS or GCP. Again, not a lot of choice or creativity. But what we've seen over the last 2 days is a Cambrian explosion of choices. And just take ambient listening. Do you go with Suki, a bridge, DAX? Do you deploy it in ambulatory care or the emergency department first? You have these choices times 100, right? So this is an exciting time for healthcare. And what Signal One is trying to do is to be an enabler of that and enable a health system as ambitious as UT Health and its locations to manage that transition effectively.
Thank you. Robert, please tell us your vision for healthcare and what role AI is playing at Nuance.
So a very interesting thing that we've seen in the last 2 days and that we've seen over the last year and a half is the proliferation of AI in many different venues, different care areas. And never in my 43 years of formal healthcare have I ever seen something take over the industry so quickly. We tend to be very conservative. You know, things have to be reviewed. What's the ROI? Go through legal and compliance. How are we going to deploy it? And we have seen this like wildfire. It's obviously here to stay. So the question really becomes, and you and I spoke about this, what happens next? What's the evolution? Where else will it spread to? And I think we're going to hear from these leaders exactly where those innovations and changes will come from.
Thank you. Justin.
Thanks so much for having me. And we're super grateful to be partnered with a number of the systems here across Texas. So I'm Justin Norden, co-founder and CEO of Qualified Health. And we see ourselves as a partner to build the infrastructure for generative AI in healthcare and partner with health systems to build, test, deploy, monitor, and govern these AI systems. Morgan, as you were talking about in the opening remarks, the number of pilots or speed to build a prototype has never been faster. But where we're falling short as an industry is how do we take that into production? How do we know it works? How do we, once we know it works, train our staff and relearn the workflow we want to do? And then how do we scale this across an organization? This is fundamentally the problem we're very grateful to be tackling with a number of the systems here today, and happy to spend more time talking about this, because until we can figure out that last mile step, we will get stuck. And so that's where we're just really excited to say, how do we do this end to end, going from idea all the way into production and scale?
Henry.
First off, thank you for the opportunity to be here with all of you. Canary Speech is a company that focuses on the use of vocal biomarkers. My business partner, Jeff Adams, and I, 9 years ago, met in a bagel shop. Jeff was responsible for leading the team for the original Dragon, built the first commercially available NLP. During that process, his team wrote the code for Siri. And when Amazon was looking for a team to build the Alexa product, they simply bought the company Jeff was in. And he led the team to build the Amazon Echo as well. Having finished that up 9 years ago, I asked him a simple question. I said, what's left on your table? What do you want to do? We had met 40 years earlier. I was at the NIH at the time. He was at the NSA. And he said, I've always wanted to use voice for the analysis of human condition and disease. And so I said, well, why don't we do that? The field was 25 years in without a single product in healthcare. Our approach, 13 patents issued, 12 patents pending later. We have launched 12 different models for different human conditions and diseases in multiple languages and deployed it across the world. We're currently developing 10 additional models. As a clinical decision support tool, we wanted to be a companion to the clinical team. We wanted to offer them an objective measurement of the individual in real time to augment their interaction with their patient. And we're doing that today in partnership with Microsoft. At HIMSS, we announced a partnership in the Dragon Copilot. And since HIMSS to today, we have demoed that over 150 times at institutions. The opportunity to use vocal biomarkers was a dream that Jeff had, to provide a tool to assist and augment the treatment of patients regardless of where they lived in the world. Non-invasively, in ambient listening, non-intrusively. And that was our goal.
Thank you. And last but not least, Alex.
Hello, hey everyone. My name is Alex. I'm the founder and CEO of Lena Health, and Lena is an agentic care coordinator that can telephonically coordinate across multiple different steps, coordinate with multiple organizations. The story of Lena is actually from here in the Texas Medical Center. I was a fellow at the Innovation Institute. It's a cookie factory down the road. And there I had this badge as a fellow, a badge that gave me access to the 60 member institutions here. And I had the chance to go into the ER, follow patients through as they're admitted to the hospital, follow them home sometimes if they let me as they're discharged to the home, and then follow up with them. And what I saw over and over again, especially with patients that are elderly patients or patients that have multiple chronic conditions, is that healthcare is completely confusing and challenging and complex. And it is a maze to navigate, and so these patients often fall through the cracks. There are delays in getting their screenings, delays in getting their follow-ups, and so they're rehospitalized, they're readmitted, and it's a big problem. And so what I ultimately wanted to understand is what is available today, and we saw that there are amazing nurses and community health workers, but there's just not enough. And we followed them, but then I asked, can I be a navigator myself? And so I became a care coordinator for patients, and I had about 150 patients that I navigated for over a year. And to my surprise, most of the time that I spent was doing non-medical care coordination, following up with a pharmacy, helping a patient get a dentist, helping them find transportation, or even a quadriplegic patient with a wheelchair that needed to get their wheelchair fixed, needed to find a technician, and then coordinate with insurance to see if that could get paid for. And so we figured out, how can we use AI to automate and give patients better access, coordinate care so that it's simpler, easier, and ultimately improve outcomes. And so that's what Lena is, and we're deployed in multiple health systems, and we've done studies that showed we can reduce avoidable hospitalizations and improve patient outcomes. So excited to be here. Thank you so much.
Fantastic, thank you, and love the anecdotes around some of the founding stories I always find interesting. But as you can see represented on our panel today, we have a broad array of technologies and solutions from the back office to the front office. And as we ask ourselves about deployment of this technology in the wild, these are very different experiences, and the burden of proof and the level of trust building that has to go on for something that might be focused on revenue cycle versus something on clinical care, it's imperative that we treat these things uniquely as they are. I'm really glad that also someone brought up the scribing example. When I take a step back and think about our field and its maturation since the HITECH Act, I would argue that the adoption of AI scribes is the greatest adoption of technology by health systems in the United States since the EMR. And the interesting thing about it has been it's manifested without any sort of regulatory stimulus, any sort of budgetary stimulus. This is coming right off of the provider balance sheet, which I find all the more striking. I want to take a moment, as has been a common theme throughout discussions over the last 2 days, to talk tactically about trust building. And I want to start with our two clinicians in the center, because I think we can all agree as patients and as clinicians in this room, the sacred core of our industry is that one-to-one conversation between a patient and their provider. And as we think about inserting technology in and around that conversation in clinical workflows, I'd love to hear from the both of you. How have you approached trust building at your respective organizations?
I guess I'll take that first. I think in terms of trust first is who you partner with, understanding how the technology works. We've talked a lot about AI governance and bringing that into reality at a healthcare organization. So you have to have that foundation that you believe in and partner with a company that you know is going to be able to do it fully. Would it be a 5-person company, a 500-person company, or 165,000 worldwide employees type of thing. I think the next thing is then the testing phase, where you do a pilot or you run it and you see what your results are. Ultimately, what you have to look at, and you and I talked about this too, is what are your metrics, what's the quality, do your review and audits, and see what you're getting. I think the reality is, at the end of all that, and we're seeing this with some pretty incredible and repeatable results, is physician well-being. We talk about that a lot. I don't ever want to say the word burnout. I want to say physician well-being, and that's improved dramatically with ambient. We're taking them away, like you said, from the tasks of the EHR, and then secondarily looking at patient satisfaction and seeing scores going up. I don't want to say organically. It's coming because of ambient. The physician's face-to-face with the patient, for example. I think from that is how you develop a lot of trust, and you're going to say, this is a tool that we need to have.
Yeah, thank you for the question, Morgan. This isn't just an important question, I would argue. I would say this is the question that will determine whether we have AI successfully adopted across healthcare. Can we build trust with these tools, and how do we do that? So as a little bit of background, actually, before starting Qualified Health, I actually founded a company literally called Trustworthy AI. And it was this idea that if we were going to bring these AI technologies into healthcare, we need to know how they perform, make sure that they're safe, and be able to explain this to both our clinicians and our patients. Unfortunately, I found out in 2017 and 2018, literally no one cared, at least in healthcare. It was too soon for people wanting to deploy these tools, and we were very fortunate to actually pivot to the autonomous vehicle world and end up selling that company to Waymo, which I will argue is the pinnacle of deploying AI in life and death settings today. And just as a quick poll, who's actually taken a Waymo ride yet? I guess it's moving to Austin now. Not that many of you. So when you go to a city next, give it a try. It really feels like you're a little bit in part of the future. Fast forward to 2022, the launch of ChatGPT, and all of a sudden, everyone's starting to use these tools, experiment with these tools. But there's this interesting line as we think about bringing it into healthcare. What is it safe for? Is it good enough yet? And these things are changing all the time. And fundamentally, as a field, healthcare is risk averse. As clinicians, we're used to looking at the evidence and making sure it's working. And fundamentally, there is a big gap today for how we do that with these tools. And so if we want to drive adoption, we need to say, how do we build trust with these models? And one step is pre-deployment evaluation. The FDA had a lot of talk before in the prior administration about how we actually even set standards, and groups like CHAI coming together to say, how do we set the bar for what good and safe AI deployment looks like? And then it's after the fact, post-deployment monitoring. Once we deploy these systems, as you mentioned, how do we know that they're performing as intended? And then how do we give that data back to our clinicians and our patients to build trust? This is the question we have to solve today. And I'll fast forward actually to a couple conversations this week. I came here from DC and had meetings with Dr. Oz and Dr. McCary. Dr. Oz running CMS and McCary running the FDA. They want to lean in to AI. They see this as the answer out of our inefficient current state of healthcare. And they are looking to us, they are looking to academics, they're looking to industry to help them solve this problem. And so this is the problem to solve if we're going to deploy these technologies effectively.
I love to hear the tight collaboration between the current administration and the technology ecosystem, because I think our guidelines as PDFs do us very little good if they are not executable in the same ways that our technology products are. And so I'm encouraged to hear that. Tomi, what's so interesting about your story is in many ways you've taken your talents to healthcare from other industries. And so I'm curious to hear from other technology cycles you've been a part of, specifically outside of healthcare, what can we learn as it relates to trust building, and maybe what should we leave behind and do differently?
Thanks, Morgan. So I started out in big tech, then I went to banking, and now I'm in healthcare. So having done kind of 3 industries. In big tech, and it all did come down to trust. Machine learning, AI, it's a superpower, but it will only be used if people trust it. And so my first experience was in Silicon Valley. I introduced machine learning into web search ranking. I was an engineer at a time when Yahoo, Google, Microsoft were kind of beating each other for web search dominance. And at Yahoo, we deployed machine learning to do that ranking. But up till then, it was a room full of PhDs debating every turn of the dial, like really studying the algorithm. And then lo and behold, this black box showed empirically that the machine could code better rules than the humans could, but we couldn't understand it. So somebody had to make that business decision of taking the most important part of the stack and turning it over to a machine and not knowing how it worked. That's a massive decision. You have to build a lot of trust and evidence to be able to do that. Now, in consumer tech, it's just a matter of A/B testing and seeing what works better. A simple way of building that trust. I did it again in banking, and I directed AI's efforts into high-risk use cases like credit underwriting. And you're essentially arguing with a credit underwriter and the chief risk officer of why machine learning is better. And then, of course, the regulators are all over you on those decisions. But again, nobody's dying. It's just dollars and cents. And the feds have very clear boundaries of how this should be deployed in order to not bias against anyone. Healthcare is just like another level of complexity in building trust and adoption. And I fully agree with Robert that people will trust a new technology if they get value out of it. And it's only until recently that physicians have gotten value out of AI through Scribes, summarization tools, et cetera. So there has to be a quid pro quo. And for the first time, really, there's really reception and appreciation for what AI can do that will, I think, open up the floodgates for broad adoption of AI.
There's a common theme in the remarks that the three of you have made, and I want to come to Henry and Alex next, which is data telling the story of trust versus the story of trust telling the data, right? And I think that investing deeply in the actual, or I would say maybe actuarial analysis, but at least the data-driven analysis of ROI is what's going to be enduring for companies. And you might be able to sell on vibe or sell on a promise or a roadmap, but ultimately, if you're talking about a 10-year relationship with a health system or a payer, I would imagine year over year that contract is going to be reevaluated on the basis of the data that you're generating. Henry, you're in a unique position where the kinds of data that you're generating is very clinical in nature. And at the same time, you've had to generate that data on, I imagine, shoestring budgets of startup equity in a quite scrappy way. And so I would love to hear your experience of how you've approached generating the data to build trust and demonstrate the value proposition of your technology, all the while building the plane as you're flying it.
Thank you. I think the important thing is that at the very beginning, you decide you're going to be a partner in healthcare. I'm 71 years old now. I started at NIH 40 years ago. My entire career is in healthcare. I've seen the evolution of that. Today, Canary Speech functions and operates at the same level of any healthcare institution in the world, and we're deployed in many countries. We're high trust, we're ISO standard audited. Microsoft, when they began working with us, we went through a number of different audits. Their audit prior to us being with them at HIMSS in their booth was 3 separate audits. Microsoft's internal team did an audit. They gave us a list of external auditors, which we hired one, and then they asked us to do an internal audit, 78 pages, your typical audit. So the balance is that they did an audit, we did an audit, and an independent auditor did an audit. And those have to align. And those audits included every conceivable thing that any healthcare institution goes through. So as a supplier and partner in healthcare, you really just have to decide, that's what I'm going to do. All of it's possible, but everything we do, the models we develop are all developed in relationship, in partnership with clinical centers around the US and around the world. They are IRB reviewed, they are protocol reviewed, they are peer reviewed, they are conducted like any other clinical trial. And then we hire external independent CROs to then collect data across broad populations, across broad demographics, and we validate those models. All of that has to be done. It's required by integrity to do so. We don't use social media to collect data. It's irresponsible. We use clinical centers to do that, and the ground truth for us is the expert in the field, and their peers review it. You have to do that. and then we validate those models. We today operate in Japanese, Spanish, and English. We're adding multiple languages. We gather data across all platforms, including smart devices, video conferencing, telephone. The Japanese government uses us as part of their national healthcare system. We're deploying that in the UK as well. Partners such as Harvard Beth Israel, Hackensack Meridian, Intermountain Healthcare, NYU, a dozen others in the US, Tala Hospital in Ireland, the National Institutes of Health, both here and in Japan, published with us. You have to decide if you're going to be a partner in healthcare, you have to have the integrity to do that correctly.
Thank you. Yeah, I think your remarks will circle back to just this notion of how to build in proximity with incumbent organizations that have been doing something a certain way for many decades, and what it means to actually partner versus try to disintermediate, which I think is often the bias of a tech company, is to get in there and break things, and you've built differently. And so, Henry, I want to circle back to that. Alex, just to call out maybe something that's not so obvious to our group, but my understanding is your product and technology at Lena is the only one that is on this stage today autonomously interfacing with patients and coordinating and managing aspects of their care. I couldn't think of a more high-stakes clinical workflow. And in lieu of us having FDA-cleared LLMs, for example, which we do not yet have, how have you thought about benchmarking the performance of your system at Lena, ensuring patient safety, and ultimately utilizing, again, that data to build trust with your partners?
Yeah, so I think sort of to your question about what's often a little bit non-intuitive about where we started, and I'll talk a little bit about how we evaluate. So one of our theses going in was, from my experience and as a fellow, was that really 90% of patients' barriers and needs are non-medical in nature. And so we focused on this, rising risk and high risk population that have a lot to deal with. And what we actually find is that it's true. About actually 95% of their needs are non-medical. They need to find a new doctor. They need to deal with their pharmacy. And so one of the things that we ultimately do is navigate the logistics of healthcare for patients, help them navigate to community-based organizations. And so for us, safety is ultimately tracking what are the interactions that come up with patients, but also how can we resolve fully end-to-end those needs, because often it takes about 5-6 different steps of calling the insurance, then calling the pharmacy, and then sometimes calling the food pantry organization and enrolling that member. And so the key evaluation for us in the near term, so immediate leading indicators, is how is this AI able to handle that, which usually would require a human end-to-end. And then lagging indicator is really doing an analysis on outcomes, which is what our population health partners care about, reducing readmissions and reducing hospitalizations. They care about quality metrics, closing care gaps, and then we follow that, and that's ultimately what leads to that long sustained trust, is that a peer-reviewed study, for example, by one of our partners showed that we reduce total cost of care by $3,000 per patient. And so I think that that's what ultimately validates this thesis of not coordinate these non-medical needs improves outcomes because you're improving access. It's ultimately the long-term relationship and how you validate that.
I love that. I love that. And so, talking about how to close this gap between, or I guess what many are calling pilotitis, but close the gap between, pilot and production. I think that's a very eloquent, Alex, articulation of how to do that with data that the system understands, right? It all goes back to the patient, outcomes, total cost of care, et cetera. But maybe we could go back to this notion of partnership. We ran an analysis a few months ago just looking at the companies in healthcare with the largest market share. And it was a very crude analysis, but you could imagine some of the companies that might be on that list. And when you look at companies in healthcare with large market shares and you look at their founding year, the basket that we looked at, can anyone guess what the founding year was? The median founding year was 1964, which was eye-opening. but I think speaks to this need to build AI products in collaboration with incumbents if you want to get distribution and you want to deliver the impact that I think many on this stage, all on this stage, seek to deliver. And so in that spirit, we have a room full of executives many of whom may work at some of those institutions, and I'd be curious to hear from our panelists, what have organizations done well as partners to your companies at the earliest stages, specifically around what you're doing in AI? And what have you learned from some of the experiences that maybe haven't gone as well in terms of those collaborations?
If I can start. The organizations that have done it well have thought about it from an enterprise lens. And I think the industry is at an inflection point where up till now, over the last 5 years, there's been an abundance of science experiments and R&D happening at the department level. And it's, that's a great way of trying a lot of things. But a lot of health systems are moving away from kind of a distributed approach to AI to an enterprise approach to AI. And you've seen that happening throughout the US. A lot of health organizations are hiring chief AI officers, as an example. So it's working really well is when the organization puts a kind of strategic enterprise-wide lens on it and thinks about how to run an AI program strategically, enterprise-wide, with the right kind of leadership, governance, funding structures in place. And that's that's kind of what Signal One offers is health providers. We provide health providers a management system that enables them to manage all of their AI across the enterprise. And kind of the key unlock is to manage both the opportunity, but also manage the risk associated with it, and have a full view across all forms of AI, whether it's predictive, computer vision, or Gen AI.
To build off of that, and maybe I can talk about one partnership in particular, working with UTMB here in Texas and having the leadership, Dr. Reiser, Dr. McCaffrey, bought in that this is a priority, that as a step is a huge deal. The median health system today is waiting. The median health system today thinks about their AI strategy and we're going to wait for our EMR, we're going to wait until everything is proven out, and that is the typical strategy. And it makes sense. Right? Health technology waves have come again and again through health systems, and actually the dominant strategy has been to wait. That has been the case. We up here will probably argue, and many of us in this room, see what's coming with AI and believe there's an opportunity to get ahead of it. And those that do and set themselves up from an enterprise level will really be in a better position. And so there's a couple of very tactical decisions that I look for when partnering with health systems, which is one, do they believe technology can be a driver? Most healthcare organizations view technology and IT as a cost center. This is something to be overlooked. This is something to wait for. I don't want to think about this. But when you look at industries outside of healthcare, it's totally different. Right? Look at the biggest technology companies in the world. We heard from NVIDIA this morning. This is the future. And so getting to partner with health systems who want to lead, who want to work with you to make that happen, and then who want to do it at an enterprise level. Because that last piece, right now there's flowers blooming of mini pilots, physicians trying to do something on their own, students trying to do something on their own, and that has to be coordinated, especially when the risk of these technologies are high, when we need to build trust with these technologies. And so when you can work with an institution, like we've been very fortunate to do it with UTMB, where there's top-down buy-in, there's want to do this at scale, there's want to be a leader, that's where really exciting things can happen at this time.
I'll tag on to that. I think one of the biggest challenges that we see over and over is how do you do something like this at scale? You need an enormous number of people on the project team. You need people who know the technology and can train it and support it, as well as do the change management across sometimes, which is hundreds, if not thousands of people on a medical staff, and then do this same thing at the same time at multiple organizations, which we're doing, across the country. So you have to be very trusting. We've talked about that many times, of the partner that you work with that's able to do that at scale. Yeah, there's onesie twosies, that's easy. But how would you do it, for example, multiple UT systems across the state at the same time? And you need to look carefully, are the systems and teams in place to be able to do that? What I hear over and over again from multiple organizations is, I don't have people who can go teach ambient to every doctor out there. So how are we going to do it? There's going to be virtual, there's going to be town halls, there's going to be office hours, we'll catch them at lunch. Can we send people out in the field? They need a partner to help them do that, because most of these places, they're already busy on dozens of other projects. When I was a CMIO, we would literally have 1 or 2 dozen projects running at a time. And I was for 2 decades in provider side IT. And, by the end of 2 decades, you've done hundreds and hundreds of projects. It takes a lot of people to scale things like that.
It's interesting. We currently have 13 ongoing clinical trials with 9 different institutions. I think as a company, each of them are a little bit different, and you have to be flexible and work with the different groups and organizations. As a company, we have to be mature enough to be able to work through the complexity of a project. Let me give you just 2 examples that are different in how they approach it. The Harvard Beth Israel group, we work primarily with the neurology group. Our progressive neurological diseases, the foundation of them began there. When we approached them, we wanted to validate some Parkinson's work we were doing. They wanted to do Huntington's, so we did Huntington's. Canary Speech is mature enough that we took their entire existing protocol and just simply integrated it into an app on a tablet and delivered the tablets to them. We began that discussion in the middle of November 3 years ago. We published with them at the American Neurological Meeting the following March with 98% accuracy for the transition from pre-manifest to manifest as a tool in the hand of a neurologist. The first questions they asked were, where do we begin? That's the question we hear all the time. Hackensack Meridian, on the other hand, has a well-developed innovations team. Sandra Elliott runs the team. Albert works for her. We have involvement with their CEO, with their COO, with the heads of various departments. I presented to their board what we wanted to do. When we got halfway into behavioral health development, the head of behavioral health got so excited about it that he stood up in a meeting with 15 people, 20 people, leads of their department, their board, and said, we couldn't possibly handle this as an institution. If you're identifying 10 to 15% more people that we should be serving, I don't have the staff to do that. That went on for a few moments. And then the CEO said, Bob, we serve our community, we'll find a way. That's our responsibility. The head of behavioral health is our biggest and strongest supporter now. And it varies. We're doing 3 different projects with them. Our first childhood models for ADHD and autism and behavioral health for that age group are being developed with Hackensack right now. We also are working on an expansion of MCI. Intermountain Healthcare we're in Utah. I mean, they're down the street from us, so we can walk there almost. So every institution is a little bit different, and then there's all the administrative stuff that you just have to roll up your sleeves and get it done. It's just a requirement. we're dedicated to doing this. We think we're bringing something important to the expansion of healthcare for people and to enhance the ability to do that. We're not going to stumble on it. We're just going to do the right thing. And we work with institutions that just have a deep desire to do the same.
Alex, I have another question, but anything to add on? It was a beautiful articulation of your experiences, Henry, so thank you.
Yeah, I think tactically speaking, I think what we found is, the best leaders that we speak to have this grand vision of how can care coordination ultimately be able to scale to hundreds of thousands of patients. But tactically, what makes the most sense is how do you cap your risk? Because AI is a little bit scary. There's a lot of risk associated with putting this in front of patients and doing, tasks. So the way that I found works the best is find a way to handle non-medical navigation for patients. That is one key way that we found really gets through to the finish line. The other way is to handle the full workflow. So having to have a nurse available to be escalated to or be a co-pilot for some other staff just does not work. It is too much change management. Everyone's already busy, they're at capacity. And so how do you deploy a workflow that can work on its own, end-to-end, and deliver the results? That ultimately has resulted in a lot of successes in initial pilots, getting data, and then expanding from there on. And so I think that tactically is what we found is really a great approach to feed in AI, which is a way to get some tests and then scale it from there on.
I love that point. So platforms, not point solutions, and then maybe just building the car, not the faster horse. We could have a whole debate about role-specific AI and whether AI for specific roles actually fully interrogates the power of this technology to rewrite the job descriptions themselves. And I think that's something we're grappling with as an industry. I do want to poke each of you, so I'm going to ask one more question to the panel. We'll open up for some Q&A, and then we'll go back to some quick hit questions to leave you all with. But I want to poke you because you each said the qualities of a good partner, institutional buy-in, alignment on the outcomes. You didn't say a word that comes to mind, which is budget. And I think if we are expecting health systems in the United States to fund the replatforming of an industry that is approaching 20% of GDP with a transformative technology like AI, we will fall flat on our face waiting for that. And so I want to hear from the folks on the panel for whom this resonates. How are you not just utilizing innovation from a tech perspective? How are you leveraging business model innovation with AI? What are some of the models that are resonating with your clients and easing the adoption from an investment perspective?
I can start. So yeah, I think the ROI modeling with the clients is something that happens front and center before they even start. And one thing is, that care coordination often starts as an improvement in quality for population health, which may have some value-based care organization, payment models. But I think pulling in other departments like patient access, how can we navigate patients in network? And that provides an immediate revenue generation and getting patients to their appointments in network, reducing that leakage, improving patient satisfaction. I think that all wraps. And so in other words, I think that there's an obvious ROI, but how can you bring others to the table that can ultimately realize value, and then how do you track that?
Alex, one question on that. Sorry to interrupt you, but how does Lena Health charge for its services, and where does the funding come from?
So it depends on the model. So if we are working with population health, we charge per patient. A population health team may have an at-risk patient that they need to reduce utilization, and we'll charge a one per patient fee starting at $90 per patient. They get access to a Lena Care Coordinator, the Lena AI, for 3 months. And in those 3 months, we save upwards of $3,000 for the patient. So that's one model. The other one is transitions of care on a per patient fee as well. And so it's a one-time fee, and we resolve barriers for patients, and we do all of the navigation for social resources for patients. And that also you can validate with savings on not having to hire a new Navigator, or reducing readmissions and associated costs there. So often it's with population health, but when we are beginning to look at patient access, we model out when we deploy to 20,000 patients, those tens of thousands of appointments that we're bringing into in-house are something that can be easily modeled in an ROI analysis and be able to show that this is bringing in revenue within months essentially that is easily tractable and verifiable.
That's great. We'll go to Henry, then Robert, and then we'll open up for Q&A.
So Canary Speech provides assessment of a range of different diseases, as we've been talking about. Behavioral health and cognitive health models qualify for CPT code reimbursement. Canary Speech has been audited for that. The AAPC did an audit. There are 13 different CPT codes that reimburse for what we do. The average reimbursement is about $35 for an assessment. I didn't mention that we capture audio in an ambient mode. Once we have captured a sufficient sample, and we're using AI for this, our APIs are intelligent. Once we've captured a sufficient sample in a conversation between a clinical team member and a patient, any model we have built can be analyzed on that. We could return scores on MCI, depression, anxiety, literally within milliseconds. All of those are reimbursable. The average reimbursement about $35. We use either a monthly fee or approximately $2 per total assessment. Not $2 per disease, $2 period. The ROIs that have been done by some of the institutions that I have mentioned are very positive ROIs. So we're trying to bring, this is fully automated, and we're trying to bring and augment the objective information that is available. I'll stop there.
I'm going to try to be really quick. If we go back just a couple of years, there was this infinitesimally small virus thing that turned healthcare upside down, if not the planet. And if you go to a CEO and you go to a board of directors and say, along with their chief medical officer and chief nursing officer, I have people leaving healthcare in droves. This is just 2 years ago even. Retention and recruitment all of a sudden got flipped upside down by artificial intelligence. So when you talk about budget and ROI, and we talked about patient satisfaction and physician well-being, of course, chart closures, less pajama time, and all those things, all of a sudden you have a very compelling reason for the CEO and the CFO and the board of trustees to say, let's find the money to do this.
Tomi, was there one more comment, or they can find you after the panel? Unfortunately, we are at time, and so I apologize, but I hope folks will take advantage of our panelists being here for at least a few moments after our session. And I just want to close by thanking the University of Texas system for hosting such a timely conversation and for inviting us to participate, and also ask you all to please thank our panelists.